Morning, everybody. Hope everybody had a good weekend. So it's week 4. Technically, it's our third lesson, but week 4 of server-side scripting. So we've started up our live stream. So what we're going to do today, we're going to spend most of our time playing around in Visual Studio and exploring different things in there, seeing how it works. And then end of class today, I will give you your first lab, which will be due Thursday night. Okay, so you have 2.5 days to build a really simple ASP.NET application, upload it to GitHub, and post the link. So I've loaded up, this was the little file. I didn't even bother posting it from our first class. I'm just gonna run this for a second so we can have a look at a couple of the things that we did in here. We talked about a couple weeks ago, and this is kind of a starting point for things we're gonna do today. So as you remember, we looked at we built this form where we had a couple of regular standard HTML controls, a standard text box and a standard button, and then we also had an ASP text box, ASP button. So this was our HTML box. And this was our, oh, I think I locked it. Change this back to how we had it. So we saw how the regular HTML controls behave differently from the ASP control. So there was our HTML box. So we talked about this, how one of the neat features of ASP.NET is it makes our forms sticky. We can reload the page and we don't lose the values that were on there. We never had a way to do this, or we certainly didn't have a simple way to do this when we're simply working with something like HTML and PHP, right? We submit our form, everything that's on there is gone. And we also talked about how this happened with this clunky kind of hidden input, which Microsoft calls the view state. It basically encrypts everything, all the data, and puts it in there so it can automatically write those values back in. And when we wrote our code in the back end, unlike in PHP, our server-side code was actually, in PHP, our code's procedural, right? We just have one long line, one file with many, many, many lines of PHP that execute one after the other. Here, our code is modular. So when we click the submit button, we actually have a method that Visual Studio writes for us called submit click, and we can write whatever server-side code needs to happen right in there. So all of our code, everything we do in an ASP.NET site will be neatly encapsulated inside a unique function or method rather than our code just running from top to bottom. And we looked at how we could access different controls. And here was our HTML, so we could see the difference, right? There was our standard, those were our standard 2 HTML controls, and these were our ASP controls. So a couple things to note about them. So all of this ASP controls, they start with this prefix ASP colon, and they have every server-side control has 2 required attributes. It's got an ID. We also have this run at equals server attribute. Now this is important. What happens if I take this out? So if we look in our code here, we can refer to our ASP text box, for example, if we want to lock it. When the page loads, we want to disable that box for whatever reason. This attribute, this run at equals server, this is one of the things that allows us to interact with any form controls in our server-side code. If I take this out of my HTML, and reload my page, now I get this, and you can see what line it crashes on. It crashes when I'm trying to refer to my input called ASP text box. So that run at equals server attribute, that's what allows any HTML element to be visible in our C# code on our server side. So we can put, we have to put run at equals server on all of those ASP controls, but we also, if we use a regular HTML element like a div tag, if we want to access that div in our C# code, we just add that run at equals server attribute. So for example, I can even put it on something like a body tag, because maybe I want to dynamically set the class of the body depending on what page we're on. So if I add a run at equals server and an ID here, then I can actually access that body tag in my C# code if I want to do something with it. So anytime we use these the ASP controls, we have to use run at equals server. If you don't, we'll get an error. It's required. And we can optionally attach it to any other HTML element that we want to. Okay, so what we're going to do today, we're going to create a new solution. We looked briefly at some of the tools we had. So they were in this little control panel called the toolbox. So we used a couple of these items. We used a text box when you use a submit button. We're going to look at some of the other controls as well today. We'll use these again, text boxes and buttons. We're also going to look at building forms with things like checkboxes, drop-down lists, radio buttons. We'll see how all those things work. One of the other things that we're going to do is we're going to look at building a master page. Anybody remember from week 1 what a master page is in ASP.NET?
That includes header and footer.
Yeah, it's basically a template. So we can set up a template for our application, and then all of the pages can use that template. So we don't have to keep putting this stuff back in. The other thing, depending on time, we may look at is building what's called a user control. A user control is something where we have like a part of a page that has one specific function. It's not a page on its own, but we want to embed that in multiple pages. But we don't want it as part of our template because maybe some of our pages need it and some of them don't. So this way we can create a piece of a page and just plunk it into any place in our application we want, and we'll look at how that works as well. So if you don't have Visual Studio open yet, please open it up. And once you have it open, we're going to click File and New Project. Which should take you to a window that looks like this. So you'll want to make sure here you've selected Visual C# and Web, and ASP.NET Web Application is probably the only option you have there. So I'm going to call this one week 4. I'll save it in my COMP2084 folder. You can save it to the default location, doesn't really matter. The default location will be My Documents, Visual Studio 2015, Projects. You save all your stuff there, that's fine. And I'm going to check off, I'll keep this enabled. I'll let it create, Visual Studio actually initialize a new Git repository as well. So when I'm done class, I can push my code up to GitHub. And I'll just click OK. And what we want here is we want to just pick an empty project. And you can leave everything else unchecked. So all we get here is a configuration file that says basically we're using C#, what version of the .NET framework, and a packages folder with a couple of packages that are just used for compiling our code. So it's blank. So the first thing we're going to do, let's set up just a very basic, we'll build several different pages in this. So let's just build a static default page with just a little bit of HTML content on it. So to do this, I'll right click on my project. My project here says week 4. If I right click and choose add, eventually we're going to use this web form with master page. First, we'll just build a regular web form. So just choose add web form, as you can see here, and call your page default. So again, right click your project, choose add, and web form. We'll just call it default, and Visual Studio will give us a basic HTML5 template. So it looks pretty much like a standard HTML page except for 2 things. What 2 things are different on here than if you set up just any, if you used Atom or brackets or Sublime and set up an HTML page?
Is it form tag?
Okay, so there's a form tag here. And notice that attribute that we just talked about. So we don't have to put forms on our pages. ASP.NET will always put a form here. Any of those ASP controls we want to work with, they've got to go inside of a form with run at equals server. So we don't want to touch that. We don't want to take out that form tag. And we want to have that run at equals server attribute. Notice there's no method and there's no action. So if we create a form and we don't give it an action attribute, when we submit that form, what page is going to load? Yeah, it will post, it'll send to itself. Right? Now also when we had a form, when we don't have the method, I mean, we could put a method in here if we want. I can do this, we have access to this. On a regular HTML form, if we omit the method, what's the default method from that list? One of those is the default if we don't specify anything. Get is actually the default, which is why when we built forms in our PHP class, we always had to put in method equals post, right? If we didn't, it would use get instead. With a server form, Microsoft fixed this. The default method of the server forms is post. So we no longer have to specify method equals post in our form. It will do a post by default if we don't specify anything else. So I can specifically set method equals post. We really don't need to. So that's one thing that's different. What's the one other thing you notice about this page that's different from just a standard HTML file? Right, the first line. And most of what's here, so this will either say C# or VB if we've used Visual Basic. The code behind, so this is the name of the file that has all the server-side code that runs this page. Right? So these files are like siblings. This is the front-end file with the HTML. And here, if we expand it, there's our back-end file with all of the C# that controls this page. And the inherits, we talked about objects and classes last week. Right? How everything we do in Visual Studio and in C#, it's surrounded based on objects. So this file has a class file called _default. So typically whatever the name of our page is, Visual Studio creates a class with that same name. So it's basically just linking our C# code to our front-end HTML for this page. There are a few other attributes we might play around with in here later. So every time we create a new web page, Visual Studio will automatically create the CS file and link the ASPX and the CS files together for us. So let's just put on a heading here. Put on an H1 and we'll put on a paragraph. Doesn't really matter what text you put on. You have your computer today? So now if we want to start our application, we want to start the local web server, launch it in a browser. You can click the little play button here, but I don't recommend it because when you click that, your application becomes locked, and every time we want to make changes, we have to stop it, save the changes, and restart the server. And it's kind of slow to when the server restarts the first time, it's a bit slow. Our page doesn't load right away when we do that. So better off to use this option to launch it. If you click the debug menu and choose start without debugging, or you can hit Control F5 if you're a shortcut kind of user. When we hit start without debugging, it will compile any C# code we've written. Well, we don't really have any right now. And Visual Studio, it'll randomly assign a port to your local IIS Express web server. There's our page in the browser. It will launch it in whatever your default browser is, whatever the default browser is you set on your operating system. So we're going to leave this as our home page. We're really not going to do anything else with this, except now let's build a master page. Let's build a template. We'll add Bootstrap and jQuery to our template. We'll add a navigation bar from Bootstrap, and then we'll change this page from a standard HTML page to a page that uses that template. And moving forward, almost all of the pages we create will use our template. This will give it a header, footer, CSS links, etc. So if we want to just add a standard page with no theme and no formatting, that's how we do it. What we just did, add, and we just pick web form. And Visual Studio will give us that kind of basic HTML template for our page. So this time, we're going to add a new item. Some of you may see this. I have an option down near the bottom here. Notice it says Web Forms Master Page. The items at the bottom, these are the items that you've most recently used. And I was playing around with this yesterday. So mine is here. Do you see Web Forms Master Page in your list? Probably some of you do and some of you don't. I see. Okay. So if it's not in your list of most recently used files, we just go to Add New Item. And we want to make sure we're under Visual C# and Web. And the item that we want is a Web Forms Master Page. That's our template file. We'll just call this site.master. Right-click your project. Choose Add, which should be about in the middle of that menu. New Item, which is probably at the very top. And then under Visual C# and Web, you'll scroll down near the bottom. We want a Web Forms Master Page. And it will get an extension, .master. Now, you can't load these files directly in the browser, right? We can add it to our project. So I'll call it site.master. Just going to save this. Before we make changes, we'll see what happens if we try to load the template file directly in our browser. Now, anytime we add a new file to the project, we have to recompile or rebuild the DLL file because it contains all the C# code. So I'll click on the build and build my solution. And we'll see down here if we get any errors. No errors, so it recreated my week 4 DLL. So here's our little DLL file. It's tiny. There's only 5 kilobytes because we haven't really written any C# code yet. So now I'm going to try to load site.master. One of the nice things that you'll find about working on a Windows server as opposed to when we're working with PHP is things are not case sensitive. So your file names, your folder names, doesn't matter whether you type them in upper or lowercase or mix them. It just transfers everything to the same case. So when I try and load this, we get a 404 error, but it's a specific kind of 404 error. Right? It's not that it can't find or that file doesn't exist in that directory. It's that the server doesn't know what to do with a file with a .master extension. It's not a recognized file type. It doesn't know how to render that in the browser. So the master page is our template, only we're never going to load it directly. So if we ever build the master page first, you can't actually see what it looks like until you apply it to one ASPX page, one or more ASPX pages. So here's our master page. Looks fairly similar to standard HTML. There's 2 sections on here that will look unfamiliar. What lines is the new stuff, and what do you suppose those sections mean? They're kind of descriptive with their names. Right, so why would there be 2 different content sections? Why is there one here and why is there one there? Right, so what kinds of dynamic content might we be applying here that would be different from one page to another? Sorry, Chad? Okay, we might have different scripts. What else might be in the header that might be different from one page to another? Think about for search engine optimization. What kinds of things would go in the header that will be different on every page of your site? Title. Metadata, right? So things like keywords, descriptions. So this is where we can dynamically inject content into each page that will appear in the header, right? This is the invisible stuff. So down here, everything here, and I'm just going to make a comment here. So all of the individual page content goes inside of this section, this side of this content placeholder. So if we want things like headers and footers, if we wanted to add, and we will, we're going to use Bootstrap to add a nav bar in a minute. Where are we going to put that? What line number would it make sense to put, say, a navigation bar? Would we put it above this, in here, or down here? Yeah, it's going to go above because we want that nav bar to appear first on every page, then the content of the page in the middle, and then if we have a footer, it's going to go down below. So let's add some JavaScript and CSS links to our master page. That way all the other pages on our site will have access to them. So go to getbootstrap.com in your browser. We'll get the latest links to the Bootstrap CSS. We can get them here. Just click on Getting Started. Now they've given us 3 links, and we use these same 3 links in our PHP application. The first 2 are CSS files. So the main Bootstrap CSS as well as the theme. And lastly, they've got a JavaScript that's used by some of the controls. Now they've put them all together, but where should they actually go? I would suggest we don't want them all together in our master page. We want to break these up. So what should go in which place and why? If we copy all this stuff. Devin? Right. Why don't we put why do we want the script at the bottom rather than in the head? Right. We want our JavaScript loading at the end. So if it fails, the rest of our page can still load. So let's grab the first two pieces of this and copy those. So let's leave out the JS for a minute. Just grab the two CSS links and copy those. So what line, where should we put them back in our master page? What line number should we insert these at to make sense? Yep, pretty much anywhere in the head, but outside of this section, because this section is going to be, if we have dynamic content for every page, right? These CSS links should appear for all the pages, so maybe we'll put them down below. Paste them in. So we have our CSS in our head. Now, any page that uses this template automatically gets those style sheets. If we want to add our own CSS to override Bootstrap, we put that in here as well. Maybe down here at the bottom, so we can go back to Bootstrap and grab that JavaScript link. And let's paste it down here, and then we're going to need one other thing. So we copied the first two. Now I want to grab the Bootstrap JavaScript. Let's copy that. Now, in order to use this script, there's one other JavaScript that we need from somewhere else. What JavaScript do we need in order for Bootstrap's JavaScript to run and not throw errors? Because this script depends on another one. Right. We need to get a fairly current version of jQuery as well. So if we go to, I think it's code.jquery.com. Let's go here. So open a new tab and go to code.jquery.com. And you can copy the links to any of these. I'm going to use the latest one, the jQuery Core 3.1.1. And I may as well get the minified version. It's most efficient. So if I just right click on that and copy the location, choose copy link location, then we can go back to our master page and add one more script tag and link to jQuery. So we'll just add a script tag. Now I put the jQuery link before the Bootstrap JavaScript link. Does it matter what order those go in? Or can I put the Bootstrap JavaScript first? Doesn't matter. Put jQuery first. Why do I need to put the jQuery link first? You're right, Ari. Why? Right, because Bootstrap's JavaScript calls functions in the jQuery library. So it needs to find that jQuery library first. So now we've got all the links that we need. These are basically all the links we'll pretty much need for the entire course. So we can reuse this master page over and over again if we want. And if we wanted to write our own CSS and add our own additional JavaScript file, well, we'll just link our own CSS here, probably before Bootstrap if we want to override some of the classes in Bootstrap. And if we want to write our own JavaScript, well, we can just dump it down at the bottom. So let's do this. Our default page is not connected to our template. Now we can take an existing page and change it to use a template. It's probably easier to rebuild this page from scratch. So here's what we're going to do. Let's copy these 2 lines. Copy lines, the 2 lines of code we put on, 2 lines of HTML we put on default. Just copy those to our clipboard. And then we're going to delete this page and rebuild it. But this time when we build it, we're going to attach it to our master page. So it uses our theme. So I'll just copy those 2 lines. And now I'm going to get rid of the default page. I just wanted to show you what a standard HTML page is going to look like. Let's delete it. So now all we have is our site.master page. So we're going to recreate our default page, but this time we're going to pick a different option. So when we add the page, Visual Studio is also going to prompt us to link it to a master page. So I'll choose Add New Item again. When we added our default page the first time, we picked web form. We don't want web form this time. We want something else. What option should I choose instead of a regular web form? Yeah, we want it web form with a master page. So again, I'll call it default. We always should call our homepage in a Visual Studio solution, always call it default. That way, if we go to the root directory with no page name, that's what the server looks for, a page called default.aspx. So when I click add, now it brings up, if I have different master pages, this little dialog will show us all of the template files in the site. So we only have one, so it's a pretty easy choice, right? Which theme is this going to use? Well, the one we called site. So now our page looks different. Where did all of the regular HTML tags go that we had in the first time we created this? Where are they? There's no HTML, there's no body, there's no form. Right. It's going to get those things from the template instead. We can't have 2 HTML tags, 2 body tags. So notice all we have are these 2 sections, one called head and one called content placeholder. Notice these will kind of map. There's content placeholder 1 on our master, and there's content placeholder 1 on our default page. So if we want to put back in that H1 and that P tag, where would it go here? We want to put our content back into default. Where should we put it? Which section represents the main content for the page? Yeah, content 2 or content placeholder 1. So this is the section where we can supply dynamic content in the header, in the heading. So all visible content goes here. So we've deleted and recreated this file. So before we can launch it, well, I can try and load it in my browser. Still giving us the old version, right? Why did I get the old version of the page? Robert? Right, we didn't rebuild or recompile the project. I actually deleted that file, added the master page. It's still serving up the old version until we recompile. So I'll build my solution. And now we should get the new version. Oh, okay, we are getting the new version, sorry. So now it comes together as one complete page. We can see it's got our Bootstrap links in the header. Notice our form, even though in our Visual Studio it doesn't say method equals post, at runtime, it writes out method equals post automatically for us. And our TEM, as you said, the action is to itself by default. And then we have our JavaScript links at the bottom. So now if we want to try to use something, if we want to use a Bootstrap class like this, it should show up. So I'll apply the Jumbotron class. It'll give it a gray background and rounded corners around my paragraph tag. So we can see our CSS is being pulled from our master page. So when we create new pages, all we have to do is add a web form using a master page, link it to the template, and it gets everything from the header and the footer. CSS, JavaScript, it's inherited automatically. I mean, yes, we kind of did the same thing with PHP, but we still had to require a whole bunch of files, right? We'd have to add the require header, require the database, require the footer. We don't have to do this. Our master pages take care of all of it. Let's add a little navigation bar to this. Any questions so far? Is anybody confused? Or is there anything we should look at again before we try adding a nav bar? No? Okay, so the code to get a navigation bar, let's again just go and grab one. Rather than build one, let's just go and grab the nav bar sample from Bootstrap and we can paste it into our application and then we can simplify it because their version is a little more complicated than what we really need. So in Bootstrap, we're already here on this page. If we click on examples and nav bars in action, I think if we click this one that says nav bar, it'll give us all the code. So if I click view nav bar docs, so this is the same navigation bar you used last semester with Tom. So in this section here, here's our little sample, and there's a copy button right here. Let's copy this whole thing. So it'll give us a navigation bar that looks like this. So now where are we going to go in Visual Studio to add this? Where does it make sense to put this navigation in? Up here? Would the nav bar go?
No, a separate header section inside the body.
Okay, so inside the body, and should it go on my master page or should it go on default.aspx? Okay, some people said master, some people said default. Well, let's think about this. Is this navigation bar used only for one page, or should it be part of our template and all pages will use it? Right, so probably in the template. So we should probably put it in the master page, right? Then if we add 10 more pages, so long as they use this master page, they all get the nav bar automatically. That's kind of what we want to do. So where in site.master should we paste this code? Okay, we could put it there. Yep, that would be one option. So it would work here. What would our other option be? Put it right on line 17 above our form. Where else might we want to put it? It would work there, you're right. I can think of one other place we might put it. There would be one advantage to putting it inside of the form tag, as strange as that sounds. I know structurally that would send Scott into convulsions. What would be the benefit of putting the nav bar inside our form tag?
What do you have for attributes so we can use that navigation bar in CS?
Right. So by anything that goes inside this server-side form, we can access those elements in C# code. So if we want to do something like this, if we look at Blackboard, right, or even on YouTube, right, it dynamically has an avatar here. On Blackboard, it prints our name at the top. So there's a dynamic piece there. So if we want anything in our navigation bar to be dynamic, like we want to show a username, or we want to hide or show links, depending on if someone's logged in, it will be much easier if we put that inside of our form tag, because then we can access any of those elements on the with server-side code.
It's not much more practical, just delete the form and give the body an idea of
Great question. Let me try that. Don't try it on yours. Let's see what happens. So if I put in ID equals body1, let's try that. I'll take it out here. Very good question. Let's see what happens. It works okay so far. But if I put any kind of server control in the form, now I'm gonna break it. So let's put in a button. You don't have to try this. I'm just showing you what will happen. So now I've put a server control inside the form, but the form is just a standard HTML form. It doesn't have a run at equals server tag. That's interesting. Hang on, let me rebuild that. Okay, that wasn't the result I was expecting. Normally, I was expecting there it says you cannot put a server control inside a form without run at equals server. So I don't know. We'll come back. We'll come back to. I'll leave it like this for now, and we'll see if it works. I didn't expect that to work, but okay, we'll try it that way. So anyway, we have our navigation bar. I've still copied this. Let's paste it in just inside the form for now. After my form tag, before that div, morning. I'll just put in a couple comments here. This is a long section. So I'll just paste in that whole navigation bar from Bootstrap. So now we can refresh our page, have a look at what it looks like once we've pasted in that navigation bar. So we can get rid of some of this stuff now. We don't need everything. All we really want is a title and a couple of the links. We can get rid of. We don't need the sub drop down in the search bar. So it should look like this right now if we pasted the full thing in. So let's go back here where it says brand. Let's change this to say 484. So that's basically the title of our site. That'll appear at the top left. So there's our title. And also this href, let's link that to when someone clicks the name of the site, they should go back to the home page. That's pretty normal. Users expect that when you click the logo or the name of the site at the top left, it's going to take you back to the home page. Let's change a couple of these links. We're going to build a couple of other pages in our solution today. They're all going to use this template file. The next one, the first link, we'll call tax. And that's going to link to a page we'll build next, which we'll call tax.aspx. We'll build a really simple tax calculator. Actually, no, sorry. You know what? We'll call it tip instead. We'll build the tip calculator. The second link, we'll go to a page called lists.aspx. We'll explore some of the list controls. So we'll just have those two links. The rest of this, so this section, this LI class equals dropdown, I'm going to delete that. And we'll get rid of most of the rest of the navigation bar. We just want a standard nav bar with a link to our home page and a couple of other links to the other pages in our site. So let's delete that. Then we also have this whole form. The nice thing about Visual Studio, you notice over here these little minus signs. Wherever we have a section of code, if our page gets really long, we can actually shrink them. So if I click on this, closes the whole form tag. So it makes it easier for me to see a certain part of my page. So I'm just going to get rid of that whole thing. I'll just highlight it and delete it. Same here with this right nav bar. I'll just close that up. This entire UL, we don't need that either. But now we just have a much smaller, simple, collapsible bootstrap navigation. So it should look like this now. So that'll take me to home. There's our IIS 404 page, right? We haven't built that page. It'll be the same here. We'll get 404 there. And we've used Bootstrap, so it's responsive. We get our nice little collapsible menu. If you want to write all the CSS do all this yourself, you're more than welcome to. So it's kind of starting already to look a little bit like an actual application. Again, I'll just show you what we do have here. So we have the nav class with our nav header div. There's our little collapsible nav, link to our home page, and the two links to tip and lists. And actually, I can get rid of this. I'll get rid of the active class. We won't worry about that. I can shrink some of this down. So it's pretty easy for us to get the basics of a site up and running by leveraging Bootstrap and jQuery and creating this master page. We're now ready to actually start coding. What did that take us? 20 minutes to get a site set up. So Microsoft's ideas was they want to save developers time. They know every time we build a website, everything we just did are things we're going to need to do. You know, all the pages are probably going to use the same theme. So let's give developers an easy way to create a theme. And then we can just plug our pages into our theme and focus on the content or the functions of each individual page. So they've tried to automate a lot of this work for us, and Bootstrap helps us too. Okay, so think it's 10:02. We're going to take a pause here. I'll leave the code up. I'm going to stop my stream. We'll come back in 10 minutes. So when we come back, what we'll do is we'll add a second page called tip, and we'll build a simple calculator using a few of the ASP.NET controls. Then when we have working, we'll build a second page and we'll look at list controls, things like checkboxes, radio buttons, etc. Okay, and then that should be the rest of class, and then I will give you your lab and show you a demo of what the lab result should be. Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break here.